that the story kind of ended just before this. It was the one sighting at the tomb, and then that was it, all done. And we don't know whether it was a few decades later, 100 years, but not yesterday. This wasn't added yesterday. But if it was added sometime afterwards. Sometime afterwards when, if you think about it, interestingly enough, they already knew the end of the story. So they went back and added the end of the story. They already knew that the disciples were going to come to believe. They already knew that the disciples were going to get up, take up Jesus' cross, and go out into the world. They knew the disciples were going to pay heavy prices for that, but they were going to spread the gospel around the world and be very successful at it in many ways. So why would somebody who already knew the end of the story want to go back and add this little piece? What would be the point of it? No way to know, but I started wondering if there wasn't a problem at that time, whether that was 20 years later, 30, 40, 50, 80 years later, where the people who needed this were in trouble. Maybe the church was in trouble. Maybe they had hit some place in life where things had taken a turn they weren't expecting. And they were feeling left alone and desolate and no place to go. And maybe they needed somebody to remind them of the story and the outcome. That even the disciples, even those who actually saw Jesus, were there with him, blood, sweat, and tears every day, touched him, heard him, saw the miracles firsthand, even they doubted. And if they can doubt, then it's okay for you and I to doubt. Even when they saw him back again in front of them, they were frightened. They were afraid. They didn't know what to do. So doesn't that make it okay for those of us who've never actually physically walked with Jesus to doubt? Doesn't it make it okay for those of us who weren't there in the midst of those events to sometimes wonder what we're supposed to do and how we could do it? Maybe this was written for those people. And maybe one of the things they needed to be reminded of is those disciples were no heroes. They weren't knights in shining armor. They were just ordinary people with ordinary faults and failings, just like you and me. They had the ability to fall down, deny Jesus, run away, be cowards, not be willing to stand up for their faith. But with Jesus by their side, they also had the strength and the power to be more than they thought they could ever be. Don't you just know in that moment when those disciples were sitting there stunned thinking, well, am I going to go back to fishing? I guess I'd always be a tax collector again. There is prostitution. And wondering, what next? It never probably in a million years crossed their minds that they could come out, speak the truth, travel the world, start churches all over, spread a worldwide movement that 2,000 years later would touch us. Couldn't have imagined it. When you walk with Jesus, sometimes the story does change, and sometimes you are able to do things that you never thought you could do. You think I ever imagined I would be a pastor? You think I ever imagined I would or could stand up here and preach a sermon? You just never know, right? And for me, it was out of one of those moments when life stood still, everything ground to a halt. I wasn't sure I could put the next foot in front of it, the other. I couldn't possibly go on living. It was out of one of those moments that began the first steps, step by step, towards where I am today. And that's kind of how it goes. It happened that way for the disciples, and it happens that way for us. You just never know where life is going to lead you. And when life makes one of those turns, whether it's you've lost your job, your economics are in trouble, housing, your partner walks out on you, whatever, you need to walk out on them, whatever it is, remember who we follow. Because that's ultimately what saved the disciples. They remembered. They remembered whose they were. They remembered what they remembered. They remembered what they believed. And they were able to take it step by step from there on. We need to remember when we hit those moments, we still have a job to do. To find the lost and the brokenhearted. To free those who are captive in heart, mind, and soul. To bring God's love to all those who feel unloved. And this is maybe why it's the sermon for me, is that sometimes in that process we find we are set free. We are found. And we come to be loved. Well, now that's my sermon. I needed to hear that. Thanks for sitting there, being my stand-in. It wouldn't have been as powerful for me if I'd stood here and said it to myself. You helped. Thank you. I appreciate it. And maybe there was just some little piece in there that helps you along the way, and if so, that's a bonus. But I'm going to ask you to do one more little favor for me today before I get down from up here. I'm leaving earlier, way too early in the morning, to go to Belize. If you don't know where that is, that's a Central American country. It used to be British Honduras. Now they call it Belize, just below Mexico, between Mexico and Guatemala. A friend of mine has retired down there. Don't ask why. It's a really strange story. But she's living there now. And being a longtime MCC person and a very out lesbian, she is down there trying to make a community, which is not easy. Belize isn't some of the countries, like some of the Arab countries, where they will kill you if you even admit that you're gay, but they deeply frown upon homosexuality. Forget all of the other initials. They can't even imagine all the other initials we use, but just homosexuality itself, they really frown upon. So it's not easy to be out. It's not easy to find community there. They're very religious, but there's no place for us in their religion. So she's contemplating a wondrous thing down there. Could she just gather a few people and start a community? And they asked me to bring a few things with them. I'm going to meet with them while I'm down there. Besides my friend, they've never heard of MCC. They don't know what it is, and so I'm going to be like the little poster MCC person. Talk a little bit about it. I'm bringing some written materials. I'm bringing some CDs of our services. Yes. So they can see what an MCC service in the States looks like. So they'll see some of you on those CDs. But the other thing they asked me to bring was some oil that had been blessed. Now, I could do this. I could have Pat or Neil or whatever to do this. But I wanted to bring them something blessed by this community so that all of our spirits go with this. So as they struggle to find a way to find community and find a love from Jesus in that community, we'll be a part of that. So what I'm going to ask you to do now, as we do an MCC, I want to ask you to stretch out your hands, and we're going to bless this oil. God, this morning as we stand here, just as human as all the disciples, full of our own fears and anxieties, many of us having taken sharp turns and feeling a little stunned, we're going to ask that your spirit, the spirit that came to the disciples and that came to us and said, you can do this because I am with you. That spirit of I am with you, God, we're asking to be in this oil. So as they use this to bless each other in their efforts to become a loving community where you can reside and where you can begin to work and change in their lives, they will feel not only your blessing, but the blessing of all of us. That we too have walked that journey of being afraid to come in the door, afraid to believe that we could be loved, afraid to believe that you are ours and we are yours. God, we ask all blessings on this and on them on their journey. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.